Good afternoon. I'm Robert Pondiscio. I'm a senior fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for this conversation about sports in American schools. This conversation started taking shape a few months ago with a local news story. The school district in my upstate rural New York State town, which is too small to field a football team, is considering joining forces with another nearby district to start a football team. Students love the idea, but views among parents and taxpayers, frankly, are mixed. Is this a good use of district funds? Shouldn't the focus be on academics? Full disclosure, I'm personally a pretty big sports fan. I was the father of a student athlete. But when I put on my education policy analyst hat, I realized I don't have the answer to the questions my neighbors were asking. Is sports a good use of school district funds? Shouldn't the focus be on academics? What about non-cognitive skills, teamwork, character development? Is there a role for sports as a student motivator in an age where we're all concerned about chronic absenteeism? Lots to talk about today with our panel. Let's meet them. Eric Kalenze is the curriculum and instruction lead teacher at FIT Academy. He's an educator and education writer based in Minnesota's Twin Cities, who also spent 10 years coaching varsity football while teaching in Minneapolis. Jennifer Brown Lerner is the deputy director for the Aspen Institute's Sports and Society program. In her role at Aspen, Jennifer is responsible for strategy, management, and community work. Before, she was the assistant director for policy and partnership for the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, or SEED. Mehta is the professor of education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. A sociologist by training, his work focuses on how to remake the industrial era school system into a modern learning organization that creates passion and purpose both for students and adults. He's written frequently on school systems and structures, including extracurricular activities and sports. He has also coached many youth sports teams over the years. Finally, Torrey Palmer is the assistant principal at Mehta Academy in Northern Nevada. Previously, Torrey spent almost 10 years at TNTP, where she was a director and partner. She was also, not coincidentally, a silver medalist on the U.S. team at the 1998 and 1999 World Rowing Championships and a member of the U.S. Olympic team in the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Really excited about this conversation just because it kind of aligns my professional and personal interests, and it's just a field that I just don't know as much about, so I get to learn things today. So Jennifer Brown Lerner, I want to start with you. Could you just get us started on the big question? How would you characterize the state of school sports in America today? Also, could you just break down what high school sports look like now? What might be different from years past? And at the research level, what's interesting to you right now?
Yeah, thanks so much for convening this conversation today. It's a really important topic and one which feels like doesn't get enough airtime, at least airtime as sports games themselves. So I think we first with the national context. And when you look nationally, youth are playing sports less in all contexts. This started pre-pandemic and has continued to decline. So from 2019 until 2022, we saw a 7% decline in youth ages 13 to 17 playing sports in all contexts, not just school contexts. When you look at the data from the National Federation of State High School Athletic Associations, you can see that approximately 7.8 million participants happened in the last school year. This is 4.5 million boys and 3.3 million girls. Clearly, there still is a discrepancy between boys and girls, although with 50 years of Title IX, we have made some strides. But in this percentage, if we think about this as a percentage of all high school students in the US, this represents only 46% of high school students. But we also know that this includes duplicates. Many athletes play multiple sports, so they could be double counted. So the percentage of youth that are playing high school sports doesn't represent half of them. I think what we have seen is that school-based sports is facing a crisis right now related to two core issues. those being coaches, folks that are willing to coach any of these teams, and then subsequently facilities. Each state has its own set of requirements around who can be a coach. Some states, they must be educators, and other states, it doesn't matter, but they all are required to be certified in some way. And then facilities. Not every school has its own facilities to be able to offer, or facilities limit the number of teams that they are able to offer because there simply aren't enough places for kids to practice and play games. We also hear from many rural districts that transportation is another really significant challenge, simply because the cost of getting to games, away games, is very significant. Fuel costs are up, there's a school bus driver shortage, everything that you can think of is making it really different. But when we ask young people why they play sports, we hear two reasons over and over again. Number one is always have fun. Number two is typically followed by being with friends. And we also know that young people really prioritize sports as a way to stay healthy, not just physically fit, but also their mental health as well. So I think there's a lot that we can dig into on the value of sports, and I don't think that we've done enough research to talk about why young people are choosing to participate in sports and how it is influencing their overall engagement in school and learning.
Thank you. Eric, I think a lot of people form their, especially non-educators, form their opinions about high school sports by watching Friday Night Lights, right? So you were a former varsity coach, so you lived that life, so to speak. What sort of things could a student learn from playing at a varsity level that we don't consider that either reinforces or say goes against that Friday Night Lights cliche? Is it a cliche?
Depending on where you are, it can be and cannot be a cliche. I can tell you, I'm a football coach, was a football coach in a state where we maybe get 24 D1 type full boat scholarship athletes per year. Okay, so like it's not a high premium. Nevertheless, the sport carried a very highly competitive edge, even in a state that doesn't pump out a ton of D1 athletes. So Texas, so when we look at like a Friday Night Lights type archetype, I mean, the stakes are much higher because you might have 17 kids who are, 17 starters who are slated to have their education paid for at the next level. Not so where I am still. Football definitely would rank among the competitive varsity sports, much like a basketball or hockey in the state of Minnesota, where a lot of other sports, I kind of think of them as community varsity sports. Okay, it's a little less about the competition and a little bit more kind of about what Jennifer was saying, being with friends, being with friends, being with friends who prioritize their health, okay, and prioritize having strong relationships with adults who kind of show them new things, whether this is I tend to think of cross-country teams this way, or maybe even swimming teams. Okay, sometimes it's a little bit less about being kind of cutthroat and competitive, and more about just being with your people. Either way, I would say anytime any student reaches the varsity level, some things that they really like learn there is, for one, balance. When you are starting to try to figure out this thing that's very different from your academic way of life. And having to figure out just how much of myself am I actually going to pour into improving at it. Okay, there will be some demand for you to improve at it, probably from no matter how competitive or community you are on that spectrum. There's going to be some demand that you not just show up to practice, but you actually make time to improve your body, improve your skills, improve your whatever. And I know that at the varsity level, once you start getting up there, it tends to be the heat in the kitchen gets really hot for some kids, okay, that might have like identified as a football player or a basketball player or what have you. Baseball or softball player too, I've seen get really, really competitive. When the heat gets really hot there, okay, and the demand turns into being, you're going to have to spend considerable time in your off season working on this, whether it's at camps or, enrolling in some sort of fitness program or speed and strength. Some kids they don't necessarily like that. but the writing gets on the wall that, if I don't show a certain amount of that investment, I'm probably not going to have a spot on the team or a starting spot, which is what they've always wanted. So I think that is a really important skill too, in terms of like just simple prioritization. Like how much do you want it? Okay, because when we're up here, it's going to be the 11 who give us the best chance to win, not people who are just really invested. Okay, and are you willing to do that if someone is right in front of you? I think that's a really important thing to emphasize when it comes to varsity sport as opposed to the classroom or what have you.
Right. Jalmed, I'm delighted that you could be here today because you have written so much that has influenced my thinking about this. I know you've written about the importance of extracurriculars as they differ from the core. How different, or how can I say this? Sports sometimes put demands on students that are both different and even more complex than what we ask of them in the classroom. Can you talk for a few minutes? I hope I'm not summarizing your work badly, but what is set up differently for students in an extracurricular setting as compared to a classroom setting? And the second question, what makes sports different in that regard than other extracurricular activities that we might involve kids in?
Thanks, Robert. Great to be here. Whenever I'm on a panel, I always like the basketball metaphor of pass the ball and you'll get the ball back, as opposed to hog the ball. And, so I hope we can engage in some conversation after this first round. In answer to your question, when Sarah and Fine and I were doing research on American high schools between 2010 and 2020, one thing that really struck us was that the extracurricular spaces were not just more fun, but that often they provided a better model for learning. In that there's clear purpose. Everybody knows, why you're putting out the newspaper, what the purpose is of the production, what you're trying to do on the playing field. There's opportunity to learn from peers. There's a lot of apprenticeship learning. There's a lot of like moving back and forth between what you might think of as like formal knowledge and tacit knowledge. So like if we learned how to play sports in a classroom, like we would watch a lot of slides of people playing sports and try to derive some principles from that, maybe. But like that's not how you learn to play sports. You've gotta try it. Metaphor from my colleague at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Dave Perkins, talks about playing the whole game at the junior level. And Dave's idea is that in something like baseball, you don't spend a year throwing and a year catching and a year batting and a year fielding and say, when you get to graduate school, like you can play the whole game of baseball. Like you got 7-year-olds, like, I've coached it. It's not necessarily pretty, but like they're doing the whole thing. And then of course, as Eric says, like you got to practice the parts, your scales, your layups, your grounders, your pitches, but you have some sense of like the relationship between the parts and the whole. And then once we got that metaphor in our head, it was sort of so present in the extracurricular space and so often absent in classrooms. In classrooms, we often saw, lots of parts learn this grammar rule or this algorithm or this formula or this or this, that, but no sense of like, the purpose is you're trying to write a sentence which has some meaning, which you're trying to use to communicate something. So it's not that academic disciplines don't have the whole game. It's that what's presented to students is often at a distance for that. And I think one reason for that and one big advantage that extracurriculars have is that the coaches or leaders have actually like really participated in the domain themselves. Like, there's 100,000 schools in America, but if there are 75,000 basketball teams, pretty much every single one of those coaches like played basketball themselves, at least through high school. And whereas, there's lots of people who are teaching in schools who, through no fault of their own, they've never been a scientist or a historian or a mathematician so there is this sort of like generation to generation kind of apprenticeship learning, which I think is really powerful. And as a youth sports coach, when they when they changed the rules from, when something changes from when I was a kid, I'm like, what? Like, what? How are we going to do it this way? Like, this isn't the way that I learned it. So I'm sure that Eric was much more up to date, but those are a couple of points. I don't think really sports are that different. I was given a presentation for a workshop, and someone came up to me from a school in the South, and I'd been making this point, and he said, I never really thought about it that way, but our like varsity football players, like, the playbooks that they carry around in their heads and the schemes and the do this under these circumstances and that under that circumstances is like really sophisticated. And the same kid, might be treated as if they were, needed remedial education in the classroom. And so kids can really think in pretty sophisticated ways on the athletic field.
Yep. I think I'm going to take one exception to something you just said, Joel, which is that, in baseball, which was my sport as a kid, you don't first learn grounders, then throwing, then hitting. As a Mets fan, that seems to be exactly what they're doing right now. At the moment, they either hit or they pitch, but they never seem to do both at the same time. So perhaps there's a place for you on the coaching staff at Citi Field in Queens. Torrey, former Olympic athlete, you've experienced obviously far more of the athlete life than any of us can or probably want to imagine, frankly. Can you translate that for us into what that's like for a student? Obviously, as Eric alluded to, not every child is going to go on to be a D1 athlete, let alone an Olympian. Just talk to us a little bit about the individual experience of being a student athlete, whether you're just getting started or whether like you're on to bigger and better things.
For sure. Thanks for this opportunity, Robert and team, because I think it's a super important conversation as well. And I enter this conversation not just as a former athlete, I should say. So the Olympics were a long time ago for me, but also as a mother of two currently basically high school athletes. So I feel like I have that perspective of what my own experience, which now feels pretty outdated, and then watching my girls kind of make their way through high school athletics. But I'll actually share a quick anecdote that I ended up making the Olympic team, but in high school, I tried out, I'm 6 foot, you can't tell, I'm 6 foot tall. And I tried out for the basketball team, and I'd played basketball in middle school, and then I tried out for the JV team in high school. And my basketball coach said, Torrey, how can you be so tall and look so athletic and so bad at basketball? Like I could not make a single hoop. So that was kind of my intro to high school athletics. And from there I was like, well, I guess basketball is not for me. And I, headed over to the track field and tried that, and kind of ran in the shadow of my older sister, who was a kind of rock star 800-meter runner, and tried cross country and kind of in the shadow of that. But high school athletics really got me through high school because, I was with the team and getting to know made other friends with shared interests. And I didn't find rowing and kind of that path to the Olympics and national team until college. And so, but I credit kind of that balance and the opportunities that I had in high school to be able to try new things and put myself out there and be in uncomfortable situations and say, oh, this didn't work for me. And I still had the encouragement of my family and friends to say, well, maybe try something else, Tor. Like you're still, there has to be something in you. But I share that for just one perspective when we're thinking about high school athletics and the experience. I think a big piece, which I want to reiterate what Eric, where you're headed with balance and thinking about what that experience really looks and feels like, is our student athletes. They start the day, 7:30 a.m. Thinking about my high school girls, and they end the day at about 3 p.m. They head off to the swimming pool, the Nordic track, the track, and are training from 3:30 to 5:30, not even touching homework yet, and then getting home exhausted, hungry, and putting in a couple of hours of homework. And so the life of a high school athlete, you are learning structure, time management, just right out of the gates, how to communicate with your coaches, so communicate with your boss around what's working, what's not in the classroom, and balancing two pretty rigorous expectations at a pretty young age. So when we're talking about 14, 15, 16-year-olds learning how to balance all of this and communicate with adults and balance both the kind of rigor and exhaustion that comes with training with the academic schoolwork, I think it sets up so many students for kind of what life, what life throws at you later on. I think the last piece I would add here is that when you think about being a student athlete, we glorify and we look for those Friday night light moments, but for so many athletes, it doesn't end up that way. And so dealing with disappointment and failure and navigating that, I think, is a very real, a very real part of high school athletics. And it was my daughter's Nordic coach who, an email she sent out this season said, you know what, let's co-construct what we want our experience to be this season. Like who's in for that moment, who's looking for something else, and really co-constructing or committed to co-constructing something that was going to serve every high school athlete on that team. And that was something that I had never experienced as an athlete myself. And so really appreciated kind of how I think that we're evolving as we look at high school sports.
Thank you. All right, Jal, I'm going to take you up on your tacit advice to pass the ball instead of scoring or taking a shot. So I'm just going to throw a question out for whoever would like it. Is it my imagination, or is there kind of an anti-bias or an anti-sports bias among those of us, at least in K-12 education? Eric, maybe you want to start because you've been both the teacher and the coach.
Mm-hmm. I think anti would be going a little far.
Okay.
But again, I'm from the Midwest. And so I don't think that there's not a lot of looking down the nose at sport. I think it's very much seen as like woven into the fabric, kind of how we do everything. I'm just trying, as you were saying the question, Robert, I guess I was surveying like what the perception of the football coaches was like, for instance, in a staff. Okay. And I think I can speak to that. They thought we were the meatheads, like reading the newspaper during the staff meetings and not caring. But I think that's almost to be expected among the more academic of the teachers. We just kind of had to, but I don't think anybody ever thought we were taking too big a piece of the pie or anything like that, or resented us. So no, I can't say I've experienced the same bias, but I think that's just my own feelings and my own settings. So
well, I'm thinking of that Amanda Ripley book, the title of which escapes me. It was called "The Smartest Kids in the World."
Kids in the World, yep.
And either in her book or in a piece she wrote for the Atlantic, I can't remember which one, I believe she made the point that, look, kids in other countries play sports, just not in school. I think her point, and I hope I'm not mischaracterizing it, is that we've allowed sports to take up too much of our whether it's the school day or just our just too big of a playing a role in education. It wasn't meant to play. I don't know if anybody has
Right.
that.
I'll jump in on that one. I'm currently the assistant principal at Matter Academy, and we're working on an expansion. We're a K-8 school. We're looking to expand to K-12. And I can say pretty confidently that if we did not consider sports, we'd lose a lot of students. And I'm not saying it has to be football, it has to be, certain sports, but yeah, I mean, our students at our school love soccer, and they're going to look elsewhere because they want to play soccer and run and, do some of those sports out there. So as we're thinking about expanding to a K-12, sports, we don't have the budget, we don't have the funding for big teams, we don't have the facilities for big teams, but we know that we need to offer and want to offer sports, sports programming to our students because of all the reasons that the panel has kind of shared already. But I think personally, I deeply believe it has a place in schools, and I know I think speak with confidence that we would lose students if we both in terms of walking in the door, but also academically and social emotionally, if we didn't have kind of a variety of offerings in the school building.
If I can follow up on that, Torrey, one of the things that occurs to me, and I'm, an unabashed fan of, school choice and charter schools and whatnot, but it occurs to me, having been to myself as a student, I think my graduating class at Walt Whitman High School in Long Island was north of 800 kids. So we had all the sports. That feels to me, it's interesting to hear you say that you're trying to gin up some teams, because it feels to me like just charter schools, small schools in general, they just can't compete with that. This is always going to be like in an era where public schools are declining, and that other options are expanding. This is always going to be the public school superpower, right? The ability to field big teams.
Well, we're not going to be playing 5A schools, so we would not be playing, the big school. And I think that's something that's been really helpful with kind of the governing sports organizations over K-12 and over high schools. So what we have been having the conversation, like, can we even field for a 1A? But if you'd watch our, recess soccer games, I'm very confident that we'd have a good showing at, 1A games, just with how kind of the pickup ball is happening right now at recess. But somehow, I think it's on us to create and figure out the experiences and opportunities. So yeah, no, we're not going to play 1A, 5A, but I think that we can find opportunities for our students to still compete. And that's super important to them. They want to wear the Matter jersey, they want to represent the school. And so figuring out how to do this sits on our shoulders, which is our next step.
And I'll just build on that. If I could build on that 1 second, I'm in a K-12 charter, Torrey. And so I can absolutely speak to and just to kind of refeed back into the point, we actually have kids who will go with us the entire K-8 journey or a big chunk of it, and then leave for a more traditional high school experience. We want the football games. We want the basketball games. We want and I don't even think they have an idea that they want to go compete, because that would be an awfully big leap from our kind of smaller setting where it's almost more intramural than anything. We're only just dabbling in anything that's like inter-school. And so it's not like the kids have like varsity football dreams and they want to go join the 9th grade team, at the big school, because they would I'm sorry, they'd get killed. But they want to be part of the environment. And so I think that piece of what it adds to school culture is very valuable, whether the kid's playing it or not.
I feel like go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say that brings me to a point that I wanted to pick up on in this panel, which is, so in the small schools, in the charters, I definitely have been to charters, even in high schools, where they've cut sports or done, very bare bones sports, because they're putting every last dollar into academics. And I can see why they do that, but that feels like a loss. And I think, Robert, what you described at the beginning of your 2 towns, one school being too small to field a team, and so combining with another town to do it. So on the one end, you have the really small schools, and I think there should be opportunities for kids to play in those settings. And then conversely, I think in the huge, in the public high schools that have 1,600, 2,000 kids, I think we need to think really seriously about how are we going to serve the kids who are not going to be the best of the best. There's only 5 starters on a varsity basketball team, and maybe 9 guys are going to get time. And so if there's 1,600 kids at the school, there are lots of kids who want to play basketball who aren't going to be able to do that. And so how can we build opportunities at large schools for kids to be able to play at a variety of different levels, which I think is an ideal that we should be striving for.
Yep. Jennifer, I wanted to ask you, and I don't want to unfairly pick on Amanda Ripley, who I used to work with at Time Magazine back in the day. But I'll play the devil's advocate here on her behalf. Is this an argument that you see in your work that, hey, let's stick to our knitting, schools should be schools, and yes, kids should play sports, but maybe not in school? Is this an issue in your world?
I think that was directed at me. I lost connectivity briefly. So, I think that's a really interesting question. When you look outside the United States, sports are not a responsibility of the schools. They are responsibilities of community-based clubs, and that is where young people go to play. There are not school-based teams. There are, you join the local sports club, and there's a variety of sports that are offered, and that is where you can play and train, and schools are in their lane, and these local sport clubs are in their lane. But I think that there's potentially a real missed opportunity, because schools are in our country very much a hub of community. And I think that we have not necessarily done enough to think about how do we make schools more of the hub of community for physical activity. We profiled a district in Michigan in which they redid their gymnasium and health center, and it is in the summertime, it is open to the public as a rec center. And so, again, how can we think about schools as true hubs of community that can create more opportunities, not just for student athletes, but for those that just want to play a pickup game on a Saturday afternoon, or more importantly, perhaps a way to attract even others in the community into the school in the summer or something like that.
Great point. One thought that occurs to me, and I guess I'm thinking of Eric and Torrey, but anybody can weigh in on this. Those of us who have been in the classroom, I wonder and Eric, I'll start with you. What are there lessons that teachers can learn from coaches? You just described winningly a few moments ago. Perhaps the air of dismissal that goes to toward the football coach. And one of the hats I wear is in civic education. There's a joke among civics teachers that they all have a different last name, but they all have the same first name, which is coach. So there's a bit of a tension there, but I wonder if, from your perspective, you can just comment on that. What are the lessons that frontline classroom teachers can or should take from coaches?
Well, shoot, when I think of so many of the things that we talk about, shoot, even in the age of teacher evaluation and trying to grow more robust and reliable formative assessment processes, there's no better formative assessment than a coaching situation. I mean, I had a math teacher, and I do a lot of kind of the PD of my colleagues at this school. It's kind of the part of the job. And he was talking to me about frustrating scores on recent round of tests. And what do I do? And he happens to be a very good youth soccer coach. And I said, well, what would you do with your soccer team if they they could not get the corner kick? Well, I'd have them line it up and do it again. I'm like, have them line it up and do it again. I'm like, he was like, they'll kill me. I'm like, teach like a coach. Like in this instance, teach like a coach, especially on more fundamental matters. I mean, if you look at, and I know Jal was talking about, kind of the parts in the whole. Well, I can tell you this, I have coached on staffs where nobody played and all they knew was the whole. And those were the worst teams I ever coached for and was associated with, because they were coaching varsity without a proper understanding of and appreciation of the fundamentals. And for fundamentals, I'm sorry, you got to line it up and do it again till we get it right. Okay, you will get X's and O's cannot compare to Jimmy's and Joe's. We have to get their fundamentals down. And I'm using that kind of teach like a coach thing all the time when it comes to things like are you watching the film? Are you seeing what mistakes are being made? So putting it almost in coach argot, if you watch the film and you know where we're struggling, how are you going to design your subsequent lessons? Okay, hopefully it would be with some drill work that's addressing those very things and showing them on the film to see what we're not doing correctly. Okay, now let's look at what success looks like and so on and so forth. So I think in terms of assessing and designing subsequent instruction, there's so much potential there. And the people who are coaches, and this is it's always struck me as funny, the people who have done any coaching, that's never occurred to them to think of it that way. They thought of teaching as one thing and coaching as the other thing. And I was like, you can completely cross those two things over because it's just instructionally sound.
Yep. And Torrey, you have trained in your previous career probably thousands of teachers, right, in doing professional development. Surely there must be some experiences you had as an athlete that informed your practice or informed your teacher training.
Yeah, and I would echo, Eric, I really appreciated your connection to formative assessment and the fundamentals, clear expectations. I think there is a lot of overlap. I think we also have to be careful, though. The flip side of this is, so I have rowed millions of hours. I don't know, like so much time on the water, and we've just recently started a rowing club. And then I stepped away. So in 2000, shortly after I stepped away, so it's been 30 years. We're just in the process of starting a rowing club out where I live, and it's just assumed that I can coach because I've rowed, and we can't make that assumption because we've played the sport that we can coach, or because I think that we can do a better job and be more intentional and focused at also supporting our coaches to be effective coaches and with youth, with high school and youth sports. So yes, agreed that our teachers can definitely take things away from our coaches and coaches staff. I also think as a system that we should be, thinking carefully about how we're providing support for our high school coaches and youth coaches in general. In a way that is aligned with the goals of the community and the outcomes. Like I think we've named that, we want different levels and opportunities of sports for our students, and that probably looks different community to community. And so then how does that community provide support and coaching and guidance so that the coaches, have a full toolkit for building, strong, thoughtful teams.
John, in preparation for this, when we spoke on the phone, you were noting or talking about the pressure that some kids face, whether it's self-directed or from a parent or other adult, to focus on one sport early on. I think you described it as kind of an arms race for the varsity athlete experience. I mean, okay, we're all, I think, generally of the mind that sports is a good thing for kids and a good thing in school. But let's just focus on that for a moment. Can you just comment a little bit more on that aspect that may be less desirable about youth sports? This intense push to focus on one sport from a very young age.
Yeah, I mean, there may be some regional variation in this, but at least where I live, there is, as you just described, a lot of pressure to starting around pretty early, like maybe 5th, 6th grade, to pick a sport. And, if you're going to want to play in high school, you need to start, playing that sport year round. And there are, plenty of like club teams and so forth that will take you. I saw a joke that said, it's a select team and that like we're going to select you to pay money to us. So some of the teams are actually select teams and some are not. And I think on the whole, it really depends on the kid. There's some kids who they really, love one sport, and why would I play this other thing if I'm really good at the one thing? And there also are like talent differences. There are some kids who you can just see it in their hand-eye coordination, have the ability to play at a pretty competitive high school or maybe a college, and lots of kids whose parents might wish that were the case, but seems pretty likely that it's not going to be the case. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I would favor kids continuing to play a variety of sports for as long as they can, for high schools to offer a variety of options beyond just, especially large high schools, beyond just the varsity team, so that if you want to play on the varsity, like as Eric says, like there's going to be no choice at a certain point except to like really work on it. But what if you don't? What if you just like want to play the sport through high school because you like the sport? Like, are there going to be opportunities to do that? So I think that's kind of roughly where I'm coming from. I mean, my sort of big picture perspective is like, we got to remember we're raising human beings here. And so like one huge advantage that sports has over the classroom is the sort of like all the things that human beings have to do, like try, fail, get up, do it in public, be embarrassed, come back. Like you got to do all those things in sports. And so they create opportunities for all of those kinds of growth. And so I think we just want to preserve that.
Yep. Well said. When I was writing this piece, that was occasioned by the football discussion in my upstate town, I started doing a little digging on what the literature around sports in schools. And one piece, okay, this is not serious academic work. I actually think it was a study commissioned by Under Armour, the sports apparel company, that pointed out in Baltimore, which, as you may know, has just freakishly bad both performance and chronic absenteeism, that something like 98% of their 4-year varsity athletes graduated. Well, okay, if you're a 4-year varsity athlete, you're you might as well stick around. You've been there all 4 years. But is there, and I don't mean to make light of chronic absenteeism, which is weighing on many people's minds. Is sports going to become a bigger part of that conversation? In other words, for my daughter, she was a volleyball player. When I was a kid, I couldn't tell you the classes I took, 50 years ago, but I remember all the plays that I worked on, doing lights and sets. Sports is, I'm assuming, one of those things that gets kids who might otherwise fall away to get out of bed and go to school, right? Is there an issue there that we should be talking about? Jennifer, this must come up in your work.
Well, yeah, and I think the example of the investment that Under Armour made in Baltimore is actually a really interesting one, because their 98% graduation rate of high school athletes includes those that went to school through the pandemic. So that means that their attendance, even in the virtual space, was very high. And I would argue it's because their sport experience had done some really critical things, which we know make sure that kids stay in school. One, they were connected to a caring adult who really took the time to say, hey, you got to get up, you got to log on, you got to Zoom. Two, they were part of a larger community and they felt like they had a place. And three, they were provided with connections to the other supports that they needed to be successful. So if they were saying, hey, I'm not getting this math thing, I don't think I'm going to pass my math class, someone was saying, okay, let's figure out, do we need to talk to your math teacher? Do we need to go to the math help center or whatever it is? But what has happened through high school athletes is that at the core, they have a caring adult who helps them navigate some of the challenges of the education system. And I think more importantly, gives them a reason to get up every morning, get dressed, and get to school.
Right. While we're talking about serious matters like chronic absenteeism, another issue that K-12 is facing is obviously the so-called fiscal cliff as federal dollars dry up. And maybe, I'm not sure if Jennifer, there's another question for you or anybody else. Are we likely to see in the coming years, as budgets are tightened, a demand to say, look, we got to cut something, sports is going to have to go? Anybody concerned about that?
I mean, I think everybody is concerned about that, but I think that, the challenge is that when programs are made available, no one really wants to cut any of them, no matter what. There are many cases in which sports are or can be self-sustaining, meaning there's a charge to students to participate. There are admission fees that for games that help cover some of the costs. So I think that there are ways in which you can keep sports or find other ways to fund sports, but I would argue that I think that they are central to the school's mission in providing a comprehensive education that prepares young people for life. The health benefits of being active as a young person, the likelihood is that you're going to remain active. And so healthcare costs in a community are going to go down. All the benefits are going to be reaped at the individual and community level.
We're going to go to audience questions in just a second, and I have been remiss in not giving the hashtag, if you're following us on Twitter, which is AEI Sports in Ed, or you can send questions to the email address on the event page, which is riley.fletcher@aei.org. Some folks have figured it out on their own, so let's go to one of those questions. I'm just going to read this verbatim. I'm a former school board member. It strikes me that increasingly schools have jettisoned standards, an emphasis on gradual improvement and integrity, while sports have retained them. The same kids who will cheat on a paper or test would never cheat in a game. We hire teachers who do not know content, but would never hire coaches who don't know their sports. So what lessons do athletics offer us on the academic side of the K-12 enterprise? Who wants that one? I'm going to cold call Torrey, who's probably been hiring people.
I think it really must vary community to community, because just like the support that we provide teachers varies so much district to district. The expectations for how sport is conducted, I think, also varies district to district. So again, I think this goes back to we need high expectations in both, and we need to maintain those expectations in both. And so starting with a clear vision and community investment around a strong academic program with strong sports and extracurricular programming, and exploring what is needed in order to hold the bar. But in many of the schools and communities, which, and I, previous to this job, I've been working with schools and districts across the country, I saw very positive things. And people trying to do the right thing with limited and varied resources. So I think, again, it comes down to having that conversation as a school district, as a community, around what the priorities are, and then figuring out the resources and the plan for making sure that both our teachers and our coaches have the supports they need to provide really strong programming across the board, because I don't think it's an either or, and it really does vary community to community. But I'm not sure what others would add.
Nobody's going to jump on the
one
grenade.
thing that I would add here is that I actually think that coaches, athletic directors, teachers, principals all actually have the same goals for students, but they have a language challenge. I think that the language and metaphors in sports and the language of education have not yet necessarily sat down and figured out, actually, we're talking about the same thing in a lot of ways. And so I think when a coach says, I'm looking for a dedicated competitor, I mean, that could be translated to, a student who is willing to try and, continue to try. I think that there's a real opportunity to bring those folks together and set some common expectations for what a student-centered experience looks like, and what the variety of opportunities that should be given to students both in the classroom and on the playing field.
It also occurs to me that despite 25 years in education, I have no idea what professional development looks like for athletic coaches. Just none. No clue. Maybe does it exist?
Oh,
Eric,
it exists. It exists. Eric, you should chime in, because in most cases it's required.
Yeah, well, and then there's a pretty healthy clinic circuit. So you can elect it. But I know a lot of times what the programs that I was part of, we actually had PD clinics for our feeder programs, where we would actually have the youth coaches, okay, so that we knew were going to be guiding and feeding players into our program. Some sort of way to prepare the youth coaches, who is 90% of the time dads of kids on the team. Okay. And sometimes their only exposure to the game of football, or at least the more technical parts of it, was they played Madden, or they were fans of the Vikings, which is never going to lead you anywhere good when it comes to football. And we'd have to disabuse them they'd be like, well, so when are you going to show us plays? And be like, no, it's about stances and steps, and especially for your little guys who are 5th and 6th and 7th, you need to start there. And they were like, oh, but you know, I think their version is where's our playbook going to come from? Like, that's the last thing you need to worry about, you know, in terms of weed. So, but that was pretty much everything. Is I think at the lower levels, you're most times getting volunteers that have some sort of connection to a feeder program that will then kind of take the reins and say, this is what we hope to see from our guys once they come in, that we would like to not have to start at zero, you know, being a varsity program and all. And then there's the clinic circuit. And I know some states require some states require a coaching license. There's no such thing in Minnesota. So, and I would imagine in the states that have a coaching license, and I just can't speak to it because I've never been in a state with one. You probably have to keep it up somehow, just like your teaching license. But kind of to the questioner's first place, I haven't spoken about this because I've seen bad hires made in the classroom. I've seen terrible coaches get hired. It's you know, everybody's trying to uphold those standards, but bad hiring happens, you know, unfortunately.
Yep. There was a question about Doug Lemov, who is as I think everybody knows, is the author of Teach Like a Champion. He's been arguing for 20 years, the questioner says, that teachers should act more like coaches. But Eric, I kind of want to drill down on what you were just talking about. You know, if there are lessons for coaches or for teachers to learn from coaches, is that due to this training, or is it just due to the nature of sports and the way we have kind of internalized how you learn to play a sport?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a big elephant we haven't even touched yet. Okay. And that is the elective nature of sports. Okay. When you and I would say this, and I've said this before about many things when it comes to the extracurricular versus the curricular, kids are signing up for a higher level of demand from their coaches. And there's like an implicit agreement that you are here because you want to. You are here, but when you get to varsity, you are here because you're able to, and you are here because you want to succeed. And our first job is winning. Okay. And I know that might sound cold. Okay. But once you put that on the table, it's just like, and again, like I say, it's the whole playing time thing. When we talk about, you know, in youth sports, you're trying to make sure everybody can play. In varsity sports, you're trying to win. Okay. If you can. Okay. And that means, yeah, I need the best 11 on my side of the ball. I can kind of change the way I go about what I do on that field because of that heightened level of intensity, but that they have signed up for. I know you guys, I don't know if you know, I'm coming to you from my classroom. I taught 7 classes today, ELA 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are things I could never do in here as I did as a coach because none of these kids signed up for my class. Okay, none of them signed up. It is required by the state. Okay, there's no way I could start yelling at them to pay more attention to, you know, things fall apart. It just wouldn't happen. So I would like to say that like there's a lot of things that coaches can do because the kids have a tacit agreement of I am here for this. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the elective that's a point that people raised over and over when we held up extracurriculars that, you know, of all sorts, kids have chosen to be there. You know, even the like theater actors said, you know, if I'm having a bad day or my girlfriend broke up with me, like I need to do my best when I show up at rehearsal because like I took somebody's spot, like I auditioned for this and I got it. And so I have to. So I think there is something to that. I just sort of wonder if there are ways that we could, you know, like there are schools where, say, you know, you mentioned ELA, like in high school ELA, you know, kids starting in 10th grade or so, you know, that they get to pick some electives of which English classes they're going to take. There's some schools which don't even have English 10, 11, 12. They just have electives. And, you know, good schools which do that standardize some of the skills. So they sort of say, like, no matter which course you take, you're going to learn how to identify a theme and a symbol and make an argument and this and that. So I think one question we might ask is, are there ways to give students more choice, agency, purpose within the sort of confines of the school day? And, you know, because yes, to Eric's point about discipline and practice, but I think what's so beautiful about sports is they they combine sort of the more romantic and the more conservative virtues. So they've got all this like passion and excitement and community, and it feels like a family, and you got all that. And then you've got, yeah, but like you're gonna have to do this thing over and over and over again until you get good at it. And so I think it's the mixture of those things that's so beautiful. And I think the question is like, could we sort of create that same mixture in more classroom spaces?
Great question. Could we?
So I'll respond to that a little bit. And Jill, I just want to build on what you're saying is that I think the question is maybe less, can teachers or should teachers act more like coaches, but can we construct classrooms more like the playing field or more like, the pool and the race course? And because it's, I think when done well, it is that collectivist, we're all in this together. How can we grow the strongest team that we can in the classroom? And I think that we do, we see there are glimpses of that in the classroom, but because of a whole host of reasons, assessments of all the other issues that are that kind of come into play in the classroom setting, and wanting to make sure that we're supporting every single student who walks in the classroom door. I don't know what the answer is. Actually, I don't have much to say on this one because it seems really tough.
Let's fashion an exit question here. I was going to ask Jennifer this question, but I'll just throw it out to everybody for some final thoughts. So I think there's, and again, I put my thumb on the scale here. I don't think there's anybody here who is going to, anti-sports, so to speak. It's really about what's the correct role for sports in school. So let's conclude on that. What is the correct role or the proper role for sports in school? If we see sports as valuable, if we want to continue to make the case for sports, what needs to happen? How do you make the environment better for kids, more engaging? How do you make sure that these the somewhat deleterious aspects that we've touched on don't dominate the sport? What's your prescription? What are your how should we be thinking about sports in school? Final thoughts, Jennifer. Why don't you start us off?
Sure. Well, I think clearly there's consensus that we want to keep sports as part of school, and that they are essential to creating a learning environment that engages potentially all students. But I think what you heard, discussed here today is the need for more diverse options in terms of what schools can or should offer in terms of sport. The interscholastic varsity sport can't be the only option that kids play. And I think that there is, clearly an opportunity to think about how communities might be essential to creating that diversity of options. Are there ways in which partnerships could potentially expand what might be available to students beyond the school grounds?
And I would add, just build on that a little bit and say, I think another important thing is to step out or away from our own experience with sport, the good, the bad, the ugly, and be able to, Jennifer, to your point, consider the community's needs and the students, putting the students of our communities at the center of designing a really strong and thoughtful sports programs. I think it goes without saying that too many of us try to relive our experience or not as we build programs for our students, and it's really important that we step outside of that.
Joel, last thoughts?
I mean, I think sports should serve the sort of varied human needs of kids, and so kids need competition, they need community. They need opportunities to sort of try things that are really hard and succeed sometimes and fail sometimes. And so the more we can sort of keep those varied values in mind, the better. I mean, I think one thing we haven't quite touched on is, so I coach like middle school travel sports, which sits somewhere between the all participation ethos of elementary school and the only purpose is to win ethos of varsity sports. And it's really complicated to be a coach in that sort of environment because the kids want to win. Some of the parents of the better players really want to win. The parents of the less skilled players want more equal playing time, and everybody wants community and it to feel great. And so and kids need to learn and they need to practice, and sometimes the practice isn't going to be fun and so forth. You got to manage all of that sort of simultaneously. So I think there are often sort of, especially before it gets to the sort of like the winning is the main clear thing, it's really complicated for adults to sort of hold these competing goods.
But Eric, it occurs to me that I should have asked you the question that I started with. When I go back to my small town, what should I tell the school board of there? Do they want a football team or not?
I would personally say that it's very much worth keeping. It breaks my heart to see it get cut, but I've also seen like in the current environment, and especially in post-secondary, like colleges are bleeding programs that have been around for years and years, and I feel like this might be kind of trickling down. Like, is it just a sign of the times? I like the idea that you mentioned, like they're talking about consolidating with other people. That's a trend recently, by the way, in charters in the Twin Cities Metro, is they're actually trying to figure out how to actually play real varsity football, even if it takes pastiching a bunch of, nearby charters, because, charters don't want to keep getting left out of the the athletes, exodus, but I think finding good solutions to figure out a way to keep it, I do think it's huge for culture, especially early in the year, things like that. And it does just create this great sense of belonging for anybody who wants to be a part of it or just attend the games.
Well said. Boy, I've enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank Torrey, Jal, Eric, and Jennifer for indulging me and letting me have this conversation about a topic that I'm personally fascinated with. That's it for this time. Thank you to our audience, and we will see you next time.